December 15, 1944. Dense fog shrouded the snow-covered Ardennes forest along the German-Belgian border, temperature hovering at 10 degrees Fahrenheit as tanks of the 761st Tank Battalion rumbled into defensive positions near Bastogne. The men of the all-black tank unit, nicknamed the Black Panthers, had been in nearly continuous combat for 47 days, but they remained confident this would be a quiet sector to recuperate. Little did they know that less than 24 hours later, they would be thrust into one of history's most desperate battles against an enemy that had openly mocked their very presence on European soil. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how propaganda-fueled contempt transformed into stunned respect, as Germany's vaunted panzer divisions discovered that the black American tankers they had ridiculed as inferior would become their most formidable adversaries on the battlefield. Lieutenant Samuel Turley checked his watch again, squinting at the luminous dial in the darkness of his Sherman tank's turret. 4:15 in the morning. The chill penetrated even through his layers of wool and leather, making his fingers stiff as he noted the time in his commander's log. 47 straight days of combat operations with the 761st Tank Battalion had taught him to document everything meticulously. Turley commanded a platoon in Baker Company, one of the 5 companies that made up the first all-black armored unit in American history to see combat. "Sir, got some movement reports coming in from outposts," said Corporal James McRae, his radio operator, voice tense as he pressed the headset closer to his ear. "Third Army Command is reporting German activity all across the front." "Probably just patrol action," Turley replied, though something in his gut told him otherwise. The sector had been unusually quiet since they'd taken over positions supporting the 26th Infantry Division 2 days earlier. After pushing through France since November, fighting alongside Patton's Third Army, the relative calm felt unnatural. At 26, Turley had already seen more combat than most officers twice his age. A Howard University graduate with a degree in engineering, he'd volunteered for the Army in 1942, determined to serve despite knowing the military's deeply entrenched segregation. Policies would limit his opportunities. The 761st had activated at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana on April 1, 1942, and had spent more than 2 years training in the United States, facing discrimination and segregation at every post they were assigned to. Sergeant Vernon Baker climbed up on the tank's hull, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Lieutenant, forward observers reporting multiple rocket launches from the German lines. "Big barrage coming." "Wake everybody up," Turley ordered. "I want full combat readiness in 5 minutes." 20 miles away, Obersturmführer Klaus Werner of the 1st SS Panzer Division watched with satisfaction as hundreds of artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously, illuminating the pre-dawn darkness with flashes that resembled heat lightning. The tremendous roar echoed across the valleys as Operation Autumn Mist, Hitler's desperate gamble to split the Allied forces by driving to Antwerp, began. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" said Colonel Otto Skorzeny, the infamous commander who stood beside him. Tall and imposing, with a prominent dueling scar across his cheek, Skorzeny had personally been tasked by Hitler to lead special operations during the offensive. "When the Americans break, they will run like scared rabbits." Werner nodded, adjusting the focus on his binoculars. "The intelligence reports say there are Negro troops in this sector, the 761st Tank Battalion." Skorzeny laughed, the sound harsh in the cold air. "The Americans must be desperate to put such men in tanks. Our propaganda has studied these Negroes extensively. They lack the intelligence and courage for modern mechanized warfare. They will be the first to flee." This sentiment wasn't merely casual racism. It represented official German military doctrine. Since 1943, German intelligence had produced detailed studies on the combat effectiveness of black American units, concluding they were inherently inferior and would collapse under pressure. Nazi propaganda leaflets specifically targeted black troops, with messages suggesting they were fighting for a country that didn't respect them, while simultaneously depicting them as savage and unintelligent to German troops. "I've seen the reports from our observers in North Africa and Italy," Werner added. "These Negroes supposedly trained for 2 years before deployment, Apparently, their white officers didn't trust them to learn faster. What neither man knew was that the extended training period hadn't been due to any deficiency among the men of the 761st, but rather the result of the U.S. Army's reluctance to deploy black combat units. The battalion had achieved exceptional proficiency, setting gunnery records at multiple training facilities, only to be kept stateside while less qualified white units were rushed to the front. The artillery barrage continued for nearly an hour, a symphony of destruction that marked the beginning of what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, the largest and bloodiest battle fought by American forces in World War II. As the shells fell, the men of the 761st Tank Battalion prepared for a fight that would not only determine the fate of the Allied advance, but would challenge the very notions of racial capability that both American and German military establishments had taken for granted. In his command tank designated B5, Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers finished his equipment check with methodical precision. At 23, Rivers had already distinguished himself in combat during the battalion's operations in France, earning a Silver Star for heroism in November when he had dismounted under heavy fire to clear an anti-tank roadblock. A sharecropper's son from Oklahoma, Rivers possessed a quiet intensity and natural leadership that had quickly earned him respect from both the men under his command and his superiors. Sergeant Rivers' radio check, came the voice of Captain David Williams, the white officer who commanded Baker Company. 5 by 5, sir, Rivers responded, using the radio terminology for perfect clarity. Be advised, we have reports of massive German breakthrough north of our position. Prepare for possible redeployment. Rivers acknowledged the order and turned to his crew. Gunner Corporal William Thompson, Loader Private First Class Henry Lewis, Driver Private Walter Scott, and Assistant Driver Private James Coleman. All 5 men had been together since training at Camp Hood, Texas, developing the tight-knit cohesion essential for tank warfare. You hear that, boys? Sounds like the Germans are making their move, Rivers said. Check ammunition counts again. I want full combat loads ready. Already done, Sarge, Thompson replied. A former college student from Philadelphia, Thompson had a natural aptitude for the complex mathematics of gunnery. 75 rounds for the main gun, ready for loading, 2,000 rounds for the 30 calibers, and 600 for the 50. The Sherman M4A3 tanks operated by the 761st each carried a 75mm main gun, 2 30 caliber machine guns, and 1 50 caliber heavy machine gun mounted on top of the turret. They were formidable vehicles, but undergunned and under-armored compared to the German Panther and Tiger tanks they would soon face. What the Shermans lacked in firepower and protection, they made up for in mobility and reliability, when properly maintained and operated by well-trained crews, like those of the 761st. Private Lewis checked his watch. Almost so 600. Sun should be coming up soon. Don't count on it helping much, Scott said from the driver's position. Weather report says fog all day, perfect for an ambush. Rivers was about to respond when the radio crackled again. All Baker Company tanks, this is Williams. Immediate movement order. German armor has broken through at Echternach and Vianden. Reports of at least 3 panzer divisions pushing west. We are to move immediately to defensive positions at Road Junction, 7 kilometers northeast of Bastogne, to prevent German advance toward the city. Acknowledge. One by one, the tank commanders of Baker Company confirmed the orders. Rivers felt a surge of adrenaline tempered by focused calm. This was what they had trained for, what they had already been doing successfully since landing in France. Despite the discrimination they had faced, despite the doubts and the segregation, the men of the 761st had proven themselves in combat repeatedly. Move out, he ordered his driver. Formation Delta, 5-meter intervals. The Sherman's 500-horsepower Continental R975 radial engine roared to life, steel treads digging into the frozen ground as the 33-ton machine lurched forward to join the column of tanks now moving toward what would become one of the most crucial confrontations of the war. 15 miles to the east, Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper stood atop his command vehicle, watching as his Kampfgruppe of the 1st SS Panzer Division prepared to advance. One of Germany's most decorated and ruthless tank commanders, Piper had been personally selected by SS Chief Heinrich Himmler to lead the spearhead of the offensive. "We have broken through the American lines as expected," his operations officer reported. "Minimal resistance so far. The 26th Infantry Division positions collapsed under our initial assault." Piper nodded, his face expressionless. At 29, he had already earned a reputation for brutal efficiency and utter devotion to the Nazi cause. What about the reported armor units in the area? "Intelligence confirms elements of the 761st Tank Battalion, the Negro unit, operating in this sector," the officer replied, not bothering to hide his contemptuous tone. "They've been in continuous combat for over a month. Our assessment is they will be exhausted and ineffective." Piper studied his map, tracing the planned route westward. "Negro or not, they're in American tanks. Maintain combat readiness and advance according to plan. The Führer has promised us the fuel will be captured along the way." This reference to fuel highlighted one of the German offensive's critical weaknesses. The ambitious plan to reach Antwerp depended on capturing American fuel dumps, as the German military lacked sufficient reserves for such a deep penetration. Piper's Kampfgruppe carried enough fuel for approximately 60 miles of travel, making the capture of American supplies essential for success. Back with the 761st, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates, the battalion commander, had established a mobile command post in a partially destroyed farmhouse just outside the vital crossroads northeast of Bastogne. A career military officer, Bates was unusual among white commanders of black units. He genuinely respected his men and fought against the institutional racism they faced. When the battalion had been training in Louisiana and Texas, Bates had repeatedly confronted local authorities over the mistreatment of his soldiers. "Gentlemen, this is the situation," Bates explained to his company commanders gathered around a hastily assembled map table. "The German offensive is massive, at least 20 divisions along a 75-mile front. Their main effort appears to be right here, aimed at Bastogne and ultimately Antwerp. If they take Bastogne, they control 7 critical roads and can potentially split the Allied forces in half." Captain David Williams of Baker Company studied the map intently. "Sir, what kind of opposition are we looking at?" "The 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler," Bates replied grimly. "Hitler's personal guard unit and some of the most fanatical and experienced troops in the German army. They're equipped with Panther and Tiger tanks, both superior to our Shermans in armor and firepower." A tense silence fell over the group as the implications sank in. The Sherman tanks of the 761st, while reliable and nimble, were outclassed by the German Panthers and Tigers. The Panther's 75mm gun could penetrate a Sherman's armor at ranges exceeding 2 yards, while the Sherman's 75mm gun struggled to penetrate Panther armor beyond 600 yards. The Tiger, with its massive 88mm gun, was even more formidable. "We'll have to use our advantages," said Captain John Long of Able Company. "Speed, maneuverability, and numbers." Bates nodded. "Exactly. We can't meet them head-on in a pure tank duel. We'll employ hit-and-run tactics, use terrain for cover, and coordinate with artillery support." He paused, looking each man in the eye. "I don't need to tell you what's at stake here, not just for the outcome of this battle, but for what our battalion represents. There are still plenty in the high command who expect you to fail because of the color of your skin." First Lieutenant Walter Lafrance of Charlie Company spoke up. "With respect, sir, those people have been expecting us to fail since basic training. We're still here." A slight smile crossed Bates's face. "Indeed you are, Lieutenant. And if I were a German panzer commander, that's exactly what would worry me." As the officers dispersed to their units, the radio operator at the command post called out to Bates. "Colonel, message from 3rd Army Headquarters. General Patton sends, hold position at all costs, reinforcements moving north from Aalen. Expect heavy enemy armor within 3 hours." Bates acknowledged the message, knowing that within 3 hours likely meant they would face the German spearhead alone for much longer. The 761st had been operating as a separate battalion attached to various infantry divisions since their arrival in France, often serving as the primary armored support for extended frontages. This meant they frequently fought while outnumbered and outgunned, relying on skill and determination to overcome the odds. By 0900 hours, the tanks of the 761st had established defensive positions along key approaches to the vital crossroads. Baker Company, with Sergeant Rivers' tank among them, covered the eastern approach where intelligence suggested the main German thrust would come. Able Company guarded the northern approach, while Charlie Company was positioned as a mobile reserve that could reinforce threatened sectors. Inside his tank, Private Coleman, Rivers' assistant driver, scanned the foggy landscape through his periscope. "Visibility's bad, Sarge. Can't see more than 100 yards in any direction." Rivers nodded. "Perfect conditions for them to sneak up close. Thompson, keep scanning with the gun sight. It's got better magnification." As Corporal Thompson rotated the turret, methodically searching the mist-shrouded terrain, the distinctive sound of German tank engines became audible in the distance, the high-pitched whine of Maybach engines that powered the Panther tanks. "Contact, 2 o'clock, range approximately 800 yards, Thompson reported, his voice steady despite the tension. "I count. 5 Panther tanks advancing in wedge formation." Rivers immediately grabbed his radio handset. "Baker 6, this is Baker 5. Visual contact 5 Panthers approaching from the east, 800 yards and closing. Request permission to engage." Captain Williams's voice came back instantly. "All Baker elements, hold fire until targets are within 600 yards. Make every shot count." The minutes crawled by as the German tanks advanced slowly through the fog, unaware they were moving into a carefully prepared killing zone. Rivers watched through his commander's vision blocks as the massive silhouettes of Panther tanks materialized from the mist, their long 75mm guns sweeping back and forth as they searched for targets. "Range 600 yards, Thompson announced, his hand steady on the gun controls. "Baker Company, fire at will," Williams ordered. 5 Sherman tanks fired almost simultaneously, the sound of their 75mm guns echoing across the frost-covered fields. Rivers watched as 2 shells struck the lead Panther, one bouncing off its sloped frontal armor, the other hitting the junction between the turret and hull, causing a small explosion, but not disabling the vehicle. The German response was immediate and devastating. The Panthers halted and returned fire with precision, their superior optics allowing them to quickly identify targets despite the fog. A Sherman from Baker Company's 2nd platoon erupted in flames as a German shell penetrated its side armor, the crew barely escaping before ammunition inside began to explode. "Gunner, armor-piercing target lead Panther, gun mantle it," Rivers ordered, designating the small area around the gun as their aim point, one of the few vulnerable spots on the Panther's frontal aspect. Thompson made a minor adjustment and fired. The shell struck precisely where aimed, but still failed to penetrate the thick armor. However, the impact damaged the Panther's gun elevation mechanism, causing its next shot to go high over Rivers' tank. "Driver, reverse 20 yards, then left behind the stone wall," Rivers commanded, implementing the defensive tactics they had drilled countless times. The Sherman backed up quickly, taking cover just as German shells impacted their previous position. Across the battlefield, similar engagements were unfolding as the 761st fought to delay the German advance. The fundamental challenge they faced was the technical disparity between their vehicles. The Sherman tank, while reliable and numerous, was outclassed by German heavy tanks. Its 75mm gun had to hit specific vulnerable points to be effective, while almost any hit from a Panther or Tiger could be lethal to a Sherman. In the command post, Colonel Bates received reports from all companies. Charlie Company engaging German infantry and light vehicles, attempting to flank from the northeast. Able Company holding position, but reporting 2 tanks lost. Baker Company in heavy contact with enemy armor. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, the men of the 761st employed tactics that maximized their advantages. They used the terrain for cover, fired from hull-down positions that exposed only their turrets, and coordinated their fire to overwhelm individual German tanks. When forced to relocate, they did so rapidly, using the Sherman's superior mobility to avoid being pinned down. In his Panther command tank, Obersturmbannführer Piper grew increasingly frustrated as the American defense proved far more resilient than expected. "Who is commanding these Negro troops?" he demanded of his intelligence officer. They're employing sophisticated delay tactics rather than fleeing as predicted. Our latest information suggests their commander is Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates, the officer replied, but the unit reports indicate a white commander with Negro tank crews. Piper studied his map, noting how the American tanks had systematically covered each approach to the crossroads, forcing his Kampfgruppe to deploy prematurely. Whoever they are, they're buying time for reinforcements to arrive. We must break through now or lose the advantage of surprise. He issued new orders. Commit the Heavy Tiger Company to the center, supported by 2 companies of Panzer Grenadiers. We'll overwhelm their position with concentrated force. The shift in German tactics soon became apparent to the men of the 761st. The sporadic tank duels of the morning gave way to a coordinated assault as 8 Tiger tanks, each weighing 54 tons and armed with the lethal 88mm gun, advanced toward Baker Company's position. All Baker elements, be advised, Tiger tanks approaching from the east with infantry support, Captain Williams warned over the radio. Fall back to secondary positions on my command. In Tank B5, Sergeant Rivers assessed the situation. The Tigers were advancing in a staggered formation that would allow them to provide overlapping fields of fire. Their 80mm guns could penetrate a Sherman's armor at over 2,000 yards, making a direct confrontation suicidal. Driver, prepare to move to position Baker 2 on the captain's order, Rivers instructed, referring to the pre-designated fallback position they had identified earlier. Before the order could come, however, a massive explosion rocked their position as German artillery began a coordinated barrage to support the tank advance. The shell landed close enough to Rivers' tank to shower it with dirt and rock fragments. "Multiple incoming," shouted Coleman from the assistant driver's position. "They've got our range." Captain Williams' voice came over the radio, partly obscured by static. All Baker elements fall back immediately to the transmission cut off abruptly. Rivers made a split-second decision. "Driver, hold position. All tanks, this is Baker 5. Captain Williams may be hit. Maintain defensive line and engage enemy armor. Aim for tracks and side armor only." This order reflected Rivers' tactical acumen, recognizing they couldn't penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor reliably. He directed his crews to target the more vulnerable tracks and thinner side armor if opportunity presented. It was a high-risk strategy, but necessary to slow the German advance. For the next 30 minutes, Baker Company's tanks fought a desperate holding action against superior German armor. They used the terrain masterfully, firing from concealed positions and relocating before German gunners could zero in on them. 2 more Shermans were lost to direct hits from Tiger tanks, but the company managed to disable 3 German tanks by targeting their suspension systems and tracks. As the battle intensified, news spread quickly among the German forces that they were facing the Black American Tank Battalion. Rather than encountering the poor performance their propaganda had led them to expect, the German tankers found themselves up against disciplined crews who employed sophisticated tactics and exhibited remarkable courage under fire. Inside one of the disabled Tigers, Hauptsturmführer Wilhelm Möller, a veteran of the Russian front, remarked to his gunner, "These cannot be the same Negroes described in our intelligence reports. They fight with the skill of our best panzer units." The gunner, still attempting to traverse their damaged turret to engage a Sherman that had outflanked them, replied bitterly, "Perhaps our intelligence officers should spend less time reading racial theory and more time studying actual combat reports." By mid-afternoon, the situation had reached a critical point. The 761st had succeeded in delaying the German advance, but at significant cost. Nearly a third of their tanks had been destroyed or disabled, and ammunition was running low. The vital crossroads remained in American hands, but German pressure was mounting from all directions. In his command post, now relocated to a stone farmhouse closer to the action, Colonel Bates received confirmation that reinforcements from Patton's 4th Armored Division were still at least 3 hours away. "We need to hold until sunset," he told his executive officer. "After dark, our disadvantage in tank quality won't matter as much." The radio crackled with an urgent message from Baker Company. Lieutenant Samuel Turley, who had assumed command after Captain Williams was wounded, reported, "German infantry advancing in force, supported by self-propelled guns. Baker 5 is engaging, but they're in an exposed position." Sergeant Rivers had identified a German attempt to infiltrate infantry through a wooded area that would allow them to approach the crossroads from an undefended direction. Without hesitation, he had positioned his tank to block the advance, even though it meant exposing himself to fire from German self-propelled guns. "B5, this is Baker 6, Turley radioed. "Pull back to defensive line. You're too exposed." Rivers' response was calm but determined. "Negative, Baker 6. If they get through this draw, they'll outflank our entire position. We can hold them here." As German infantry emerged from the woods, Thompson opened fire with the Sherman's .30 caliber coaxial machine gun, forcing them to seek cover. Simultaneously, Rivers spotted 2 German Marder 3 tank destroyers moving to support their infantry. With their 75mm anti-tank guns, the lightly armored but heavily armed Marders presented a serious threat. "Gunner, target right side Marder. He round," Rivers ordered, selecting high-explosive ammunition that would be effective against the Marder's thin armor. Thompson fired, his shell striking the German vehicle squarely and setting it ablaze. Before they could engage the second Marder, however, it fired, its shell striking Rivers' tank on the left side. The impact didn't penetrate the armor, but damaged the suspension, immobilizing the Sherman. "We're hit. Left track assembly damaged," Scott reported from the driver's compartment. Rivers made another crucial decision. "Thompson, continue engaging. Driver, shut down engine, but maintain electrical power for the turret. We can still fight from this position." For the next 20 minutes, the immobilized tank continued to hold the line, preventing German infantry from advancing through the critical draw. Rivers coordinated with the other tanks in Baker Company to ensure interlocking fields of fire that kept the Germans pinned down. In his command, Panther, now positioned on a small rise overlooking the battlefield, Piper watched the engagement through binoculars. "That single disabled tank is holding up our entire advance on this flank," he noted with grudging respect. "Target it with artillery." German 105mm howitzers adjusted their fire, shells landing progressively closer to Rivers' position. Despite the danger, the tank crew continued fighting, their gun flashing repeatedly as they engaged German targets. Finally, L's shell landed directly beside the Sherman, the explosion rocking the vehicle and sending shrapnel tearing through the open commander's hatch. Rivers was struck multiple times, but remained conscious. "Sergeant, you're hit bad," Coleman exclaimed, seeing the blood soaking Rivers' uniform. Rivers grimaced through the pain. "Keep firing. We're not moving until relieved or ordered out." Lieutenant Turley's voice came over the radio again. "B5, this is Baker 6. What's your status?" "Immobilized but operational," Rivers replied, his voice noticeably weaker. "We're holding the draw." "Sergeant, can you move under your own power?" Turley asked, concerned about Rivers' condition. There was a pause before Rivers answered. "Negative, sir. But we can still fight. Request permission to remain in position." The request placed Turley in an impossible position. Military doctrine called for abandoning a disabled tank to prevent capture, but Rivers' position was crucial to the defense. Additionally, evacuating wounded while under direct fire carried its own risks. "Permission granted, B5. Reinforcements moving to support your position. Hold as long as you can." As dusk approached, the battle entered its most critical phase. German forces, frustrated by their inability to achieve the rapid breakthrough Hitler had demanded, intensified their efforts. The crossroads held by the 761st represented a critical choke point in their advance toward Bastogne. In Rivers' tank, the situation grew dire. Despite his severe wounds, he continued to direct his crew, identifying targets and coordinating with other tanks. The Sherman's ammunition was running dangerously low, with only 7 main gun rounds remaining and limited machine gun ammunition. "Conserve rounds," Rivers instructed Thompson. "Fire only at priority targets." German infantry attempted another push through the draw, using the fading light to conceal their movement. Rivers spotted them and directed machine gun fire that forced them back again. This action likely saved dozens of American lives by preventing a German flanking maneuver that would have compromised the entire defensive position. As darkness fell completely, a runner arrived at Bates' command post with news that elements of the 4th Armored Division had arrived at the southern edge of their position. The reinforcements would reach the crossroads within an hour, potentially saving the beleaguered 761st. Lieutenant Turley immediately relayed this information to his platoons. All Baker elements, reinforcements 30 minutes out. Hold positions. When he tried to contact Rivers' tank, however, there was no response. A nearby tank commander reported seeing Baker 5 still in position, its gun occasionally firing at German targets, but radio contact had been lost. Turley made a difficult decision. Second platoon, I need 2 tanks to push forward and recover Baker 5's crew. They've been holding that draw single-handedly for hours. 2 Shermans advanced cautiously toward Rivers' position, using the darkness for concealment. When they arrived, they found the tank still operational but Rivers unconscious from blood loss. The rest of the crew had continued fighting under Corporal Thompson's direction. He refused evacuation twice, Thompson told the recovery team as they carefully moved Rivers out of the tank. Said he wouldn't abandon his post as long as he could still give orders. Rivers was evacuated to a field hospital, but died of his wounds before morning. His actions during the critical hours of the German offensive would later be recognized with a posthumous Medal of Honor, though the award would not be presented until 1997. After decades of historical review acknowledged the systemic racism that had denied appropriate recognition to black service members. By midnight, the reinforcements from the 4th Armored Division had fully integrated into the defensive perimeter, allowing the exhausted men of the 761st to rotate out of the front line for the first time in nearly 48 hours. The crucial crossroads remained in American hands, forming a key part of the defensive perimeter that would ultimately contain the German offensive. At his headquarters 20 miles behind the front, Field Marshal Walter Model, commander of German forces on the Western Front, received Piper's report on the day's action. We encountered unexpectedly strong resistance from American armor, particularly the 761st Tank Battalion. Despite our intelligence assessment, these Negro troops fought with extraordinary skill and determination. They delayed our advance by approximately 12 hours, allowing significant American reinforcements to reach Bastogne. Model studied the map, noting how the failure to capture the crossroads had forced a lengthy detour for the German spearhead units. This delay is unacceptable. The entire offensive depends on speed. The delay was unavoidable, Piper's report continued. The American tankers employed sophisticated tactics, using terrain and coordinated fire to maximize effectiveness despite their technical disadvantage. Our casualties include 7 Panthers, 4 Tigers, and 3 Marder 3s destroyed or disabled, plus approximately 150 infantry casualties. These losses, while not catastrophic in absolute terms, represented a significant percentage of the offensive's most valuable assets, the heavy tanks that were supposed to spearhead the breakthrough to Antwerp. More importantly, the 761st's determined stand had consumed precious time that the German offensive could not afford to lose. As December 16th dawned, the Battle of the Bulge entered its second day. The German offensive continued to push westward, creating the bulge in American lines that gave the battle its name. However, the critical first-day objectives had not been met, and American forces were already beginning the process of containment that would ultimately doom Hitler's last gamble in the West. The 761st Tank Battalion would continue to play a crucial role throughout the battle. After a brief period of recovery and repair, they returned to combat on December 17th, helping to establish and maintain the defensive perimeter around Bastogne that would become famous for its defiant resistance to German demands for surrender. 3 days later, Sergeant Reuben Rivers was posthumously awarded the Silver Star for his actions on December 15th, 16. The citation, read to the assembled men of Baker Company, noted his exceptional courage and tactical acumen in the face of overwhelming enemy superiority. What the citation didn't mention was that Rivers had already been recommended for the Medal of Honor, a recommendation that would be buried in administrative processes influenced by the racial attitudes of the time. Captain David Williams, recovered from the wounds that had temporarily removed him from command during the critical hours of the battle, addressed the company after the ceremony. What Sergeant Rivers and all of you accomplished on December 15th wasn't just important for this battle. You've changed perceptions that needed changing. Reports from prisoners indicate the Germans had been told you would break and run at the first sign of serious resistance. Instead, You gave them a fighting lesson they won't forget." William's words were prophetic. German assessments of the 761st shifted dramatically after the Battle of the Bulge. Intelligence reports that had previously dismissed black troops as ineffective now acknowledged their combat proficiency. A captured document from late December 1944 noted, "The Negro tank crews fight with remarkable tenacity and tactical sophistication. Their performance contradicts previous racial assessments and necessitates reconsideration of deployment strategies when facing such units." This changing perception wasn't limited to the enemy. Within the American Army, the 761st's performance during the critical opening days of the Battle of the Bulge helped challenge entrenched prejudices. General Patton, who had initially expressed doubts about black combat units, personally praised the battalion's performance, telling Colonel Bates, "I've never seen a unit fight better." The battalion's effective stand against the 1st SS Panzer Division, Hitler's personal guard, and among the most fanatical and experienced troops in the German army, demonstrated conclusively that combat effectiveness had nothing to do with race and everything to do with training, leadership and courage. January 3, 1945. The Ardennes Forest. 3 weeks after the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge, a patrol from the 761st Tank Battalion cautiously advanced through snow-covered trees, following tracks left by a German Tiger tank believed to be disabled, but still dangerous. Lieutenant Samuel Turley led the patrol, having volunteered despite still recovering from a minor wound received during the battle's opening days. "Movement ahead," whispered Sergeant William McBurney, the patrol's point man. "Looks like Germans around that disabled Tiger." Turley raised his binoculars. Through gaps in the trees, he could see the massive form of a Tiger tank, its right track missing and its hull tilted at an awkward angle. Several German soldiers worked around it, apparently attempting to repair the damage. "Hold position," Turley ordered. "Radio Baker Company. Tell them we've found our target." Within 20 minutes, 2 Sherman tanks from Baker Company had maneuvered into position, concealed among the trees with clear firing lanes to the disabled Tiger. Turley approached the lead tank, where Corporal James Peterson had assumed command after Sergeant Rivers' death. "Perfect ambush position," Turley said, pointing out the German tank. "They don't appear to have infantry support, just the tank crew making repairs." Peterson nodded, studying the situation through his commander's vision blocks. "We'll take them, for Sergeant Rivers." The 2 Shermans opened fire simultaneously, their 75mm shells striking the Tiger's exposed flank and setting off a secondary explosion as ammunition inside detonated. The German crew, caught completely by surprise, had no chance to respond. As Turley's patrol secured the area, they discovered documents in a case carried by the Tiger's commander. Among them was an intelligence bulletin dated December 28, 1944, addressed to all panzer units engaged in the offensive. Turley's limited German was sufficient to understand its significance. "Listen to this," he told Peterson after returning to the Sherman. "Recent engagements with the American 761st Tank Battalion, Negro troops, indicate previous combat effectiveness assessments were erroneous. These troops employ sophisticated tactics and exhibit exceptional courage under fire. Commanders should anticipate determined resistance and tactical flexibility when engaging this unit." Peterson laughed, a sound without much humor. "Only took them how many of our guys killed to figure that out." "Too many," Turley replied soberly. "But at least they know now, and so does everyone else." The intelligence bulletin represented a remarkable reversal from the contemptuous assessments that had prevailed just weeks earlier. It acknowledged what the men of the 761st had always known. That determination, training and courage recognized no racial boundaries. By late January 1945, as the Battle of the Bulge concluded with a decisive Allied victory, the 761st Tank Battalion had compiled an extraordinary record. In 183 days of continuous combat operations from their landing in France through the Bulge and beyond, they had participated in 6 major campaigns across France, Belgium and Germany, captured or liberated more than 30 major towns, captured, destroyed or disabled 331 enemy tanks and self-propelled guns, destroyed 461 machine gun nests, killed or captured approximately 266 enemy soldiers, liberated Jews from Nazi concentration camps. These achievements came at a heavy cost. The battalion suffered 156 casualties, including 24 killed in action, and lost 14 tanks completely destroyed with dozens more damaged, but repairable. Every man in the unit had experienced combat, and many had been wounded but returned to duty. More importantly, they had definitively shattered both American and German preconceptions about the combat capabilities of black soldiers. Their performance under the most challenging conditions possible, facing elite German forces with superior equipment during Hitler's desperate final offensive, had proven beyond any doubt that courage, skill, and determination were human qualities, not racial ones. In February 1945, the battalion received a Presidential Unit citation for extraordinary heroism in action. The citation specifically mentioned their crucial role during the opening days of the Battle of the Bulge, noting how they had prevented a major breakthrough and possible capture of the strategic crossroads and subsequent isolation of Bastogne. The men received this honor with pride, but also with an awareness of the continued struggle they would face upon returning home. Many of them had experienced the bitter irony of fighting for freedom abroad while being denied basic rights in their own country. They had liberated French towns where they were welcomed as heroes, and European concentration camps where they freed the victims of racist ideology, only to return to a United States still practicing segregation and discrimination. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, the 761st remained in Europe as occupation forces until returning to the United States in March 1946. Their arrival home provided a stark reminder of how much remained to be done in America's own struggle with racism. Sergeant Leonard Smith, who had served as a tank commander throughout the campaign and earned 2 Purple Hearts, later recalled his return. "We came back through New York Harbor, past the Statue of Liberty, after fighting for freedom in Europe. Then at Camp Kilmer in New Jersey, they directed us to segregated facilities. German prisoners of war were eating in the main mess hall, while black American combat veterans had to use separate facilities. That told us everything about the battle we still had ahead." Despite this bitter homecoming, the achievements of the 761st Tank Battalion had significant impacts on American society and military policy. Their exemplary service, along with that of other black units like the Tuskegee Airmen, provided powerful arguments for military desegregation, which President Harry Truman finally ordered in 1948 with Executive Order 9981. The battalion's legacy extended far beyond military policy. Men who had served in the 761st returned home with new perspectives and determination. Many became active in the civil rights movement, applying the discipline and courage they had developed in combat to the struggle for equality at home. Their experiences fighting Nazi racism gave them a powerful moral position from which to challenge American segregation. One of the most notable veterans of the 761st was Lieutenant John Long, who had commanded a platoon in Able Company. After the war, he obtained a law degree and worked with Thurgood Marshall on cases that eventually led to the landmark Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954, which declared segregated public schools unconstitutional. "We fought the world's most notorious racists in Europe," Long later explained. "Having faced down Hitler's panzers, we weren't about to accept second-class citizenship at home. The confidence we gained from success in combat translated directly into determination to change American society." For many veterans of the 761st, the recognition of their achievements remained incomplete for decades. Sergeant Reuben Rivers' Medal of Honor, originally recommended in December 1944, was not awarded until 1997, when a comprehensive review of awards to black service members identified numerous cases where racial bias had prevented appropriate recognition. Staff Sergeant Edgar Thomas, who had served as a gunner in Charlie Company and witnessed Rivers' heroic last stand, attended the White House ceremony where President Bill Clinton presented the long-delayed Medal of Honor to Rivers' surviving family members. 53 years late, Thomas remarked afterward, but at least the truth is finally acknowledged. Reuben died holding a position that saved hundreds of American lives. He deserved this recognition from the beginning. The delayed recognition of Rivers and other members of the 761st reflected a broader pattern in how their story was treated in American military history. Despite their crucial role in containing the German offensive during the Battle of the Bulge, the 761st received relatively little attention in early histories of the conflict. It wasn't until the 1990s that comprehensive accounts of their contributions began to appear in mainstream historical works. This historical neglect stemmed partly from the same racial attitudes that had initially restricted Black Americans to support roles rather than combat positions. Just as military leaders had doubted black soldiers' combat capabilities before seeing them demonstrated, historians often overlooked or minimized their contributions afterward. The men themselves, however, never doubted their place in history. They had faced one of history's most formidable fighting forces and prevailed against overwhelming odds. They had confronted both enemy fire and the burden of their own country's prejudices, proving their worth through actions rather than words. Corporal William Peterson, who had assumed command of Rivers' tank after his death, expressed this sentiment at a battalion reunion in 1982. "We weren't fighting just for victory over Germany. We were fighting for the right to be recognized as men, as soldiers, as Americans. And we won both battles, even if one took a lot longer than the other." The transformation in German attitudes toward Black American troops following their encounter with the 761st represented one of the most remarkable aspects of this story. German military doctrine, heavily influenced by Nazi racial ideology, had confidently predicted that black soldiers would prove ineffective in combat due to supposedly inherent racial characteristics. This prediction collapsed entirely when confronted with the reality of the 761st's performance. German after-action reports from the Battle of the Bulge contain numerous expressions of surprise at the unexpected combat effectiveness of the black tank crews. One captured document noted with unintended irony, "The Negro tankers fight with a determination that contradicts all racial theories." For the men of the 761st, there was a particular satisfaction in disproving Nazi racial theories through direct combat with Hitler's most fanatical troops. They had demonstrated not just courage, but tactical sophistication that surprised enemy commanders who had been indoctrinated with notions of white superiority. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates, the white officer who had commanded the 761st throughout the war and fought against discrimination they faced, later reflected, "The Germans had a certain image of American Negro troops based on their racial theories and propaganda. Meeting the 761st must have been quite a shock to their system. Here was living, fighting proof that their entire racial worldview was nonsense." This recognition extended beyond military assessments. As the 761st participated in the liberation of Nazi concentration camps in spring 1945, inmates noticed the black tank crews with surprise and often profound gratitude. Holocaust survivor Samuel Pizar later wrote about being liberated by black American soldiers. To us who had been told for years that non-Aryans were subhuman, the sight of these powerful, confident black men commanding tanks that crushed the Nazi regime's last defenses was the most powerful repudiation of Hitler's ideology imaginable. For the tankers themselves, liberating concentration camps provided a sobering perspective on the war they had been fighting. Sergeant Leonard Smith was among those who entered Gunskirchen, a subcamp of Mauthausen concentration camp, in May 1945. "What we saw there," Smith recalled decades later, "made everything clear. This was why we had fought. The Nazis had taken racism to its ultimate conclusion, and we had helped stop them. Whatever discrimination we faced back home, we had prevented this level of horror from spreading further." By war's end, the 761st had conclusively demonstrated that the capabilities of soldiers had nothing to do with race and everything to do with training, leadership, and courage under fire. They had entered combat, carrying not just the burden of military duties, but the additional weight of being seen as representatives of their race, knowing that their performance would be used to judge all black Americans. Under that extraordinary pressure, they had excelled, earning recognition from both allies and enemies as one of the most effective tank battalions in the European theater. Their actions spoke louder than any propaganda, from either side, about racial capabilities and characteristics. April 11, 1945. A small Bavarian town recently captured by American forces. Lieutenant Samuel Turley sat at a makeshift desk in what had been the town's administrative building, now serving as a temporary headquarters for elements of the 761st. He was writing condolence letters to the families of men lost during recent operations, a duty he approached with solemn dedication. A German prisoner was brought in for questioning. A Hauptmann captain, captured during the previous day's fighting. What made this prisoner notable was his identity, Klaus Werner, formerly of the 1st SS Panzer Division, who had been present at the opening of the Battle of the Bulge 4 months earlier. Werner, now minus his SS insignia and displaying the haggard appearance of someone who recognized defeat, stood at attention before Turley. The American lieutenant continued writing for a moment before acknowledging the prisoner's presence. "Hauptmann Werner," Turley said finally, setting aside his pen, "intelligence says you have information about German units still operating in this area." Werner studied Turley with evident surprise, taking in his officer's insignia and black features. "You are an officer?" he asked in accented English. "I am," Turley replied calmly. "Lieutenant Samuel Turley, 761st Tank Battalion." A look of recognition crossed Werner's face. "The Black Panthers. We faced you during the Ardennes offensive." Turley nodded. "We held the crossroads northeast of Bastogne. You were with Kampfgruppe Piper, I believe." "Yes," Werner admitted. "I was a company commander. We underestimated your unit. That seems to have been a common error in this war," Turley observed without rancor. "Now about those German units still in the area." As Werner provided the requested intelligence, he seemed troubled by something beyond his current circumstances. Finally he asked, "Before the offensive, we received reports about your battalion. They said Negro troops would break under pressure, that they lacked the necessary qualities for armored warfare." "And what do you think now?" Turley asked. Werner looked directly at the American officer. "I think perhaps we Germans were not the only ones who believed in racial myths that proved false on the battlefield." This exchange, recorded in Turley's personal papers and later included in historical accounts of the 761st, encapsulated the battalion's achievement. They had not only fought the German military to a standstill, but had defeated the racial ideologies that underlay both Nazi Germany and American segregation. In the decades following World War II, the men of the 761st continued their battles on different fronts. Many became educators, attorneys, civil servants, and business owners, applying the discipline and determination they had developed in combat to building successful civilian lives despite ongoing discrimination. They participated actively in the civil rights movement, their wartime service, providing moral authority when they challenged segregation and discrimination. Major recognition of their achievements came slowly. It wasn't until 1978 that the 761st received the Presidential Unit Citation that had been recommended in 1945 but delayed due to administrative obstacles influenced by racial attitudes of the time. The citation was finally presented by President Jimmy Carter, acknowledging the extraordinary heroism in action that had characterized the battalion's service. Further recognition came in 1997 when, after decades of advocacy by veterans and historians, Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers and 6 other Black Americans who had served in World War II finally received the Medal of Honor. Rivers' medal, presented to his surviving family members, acknowledged his extraordinary heroism and selflessness above and beyond the call of duty during the critical opening days of the Battle of the Bulge. The delay in these recognitions reflected the ongoing struggle with racism in American society and institutions. Even as the 761st had decisively proven black soldiers' capabilities on the battlefield, the systems of segregation and discrimination they had fought to protect remained entrenched for decades afterward. Nevertheless, their achievement represented a crucial step in America's long journey toward racial equality. By demonstrating beyond any doubt that courage, skill, and determination recognized no racial boundaries, they had provided powerful evidence against the prejudices that sustained segregation. Today, the legacy of the 761st Tank Battalion lives on in multiple ways. Military historians recognize their crucial role during the Battle of the Bulge, particularly in holding defensive positions that prevented German forces from capturing Bastogne during the offensive's critical first days. Their actions are now properly acknowledged as having contributed significantly to the ultimate Allied victory. More broadly, they are remembered as pioneers who helped break down racial barriers in the military and, by extension, in American society as a whole. Their service provided a powerful argument for desegregation of the armed forces, which became reality in 1948, and contributed to the momentum of the civil rights movement that would transform American society in subsequent decades. Perhaps most importantly, they are remembered as men who faced extraordinary challenges with exceptional courage and dignity. Fighting against both enemy forces and their own country's prejudices, they demonstrated the highest qualities of soldiership and citizenship. They returned home with a quiet pride in their achievements and a determination to continue the fight for equality that many of them maintained throughout their lives. The transformation they witnessed, from the German contempt they initially faced to the respect they ultimately earned, reflected a universal truth that transcended the specific circumstances of World War II. Performance, not prejudice, is the true measure of human capability. As the last surviving veterans of the 761st Tank Battalion passed away in the early 21st century, they left behind a legacy that continues to inspire. Their story reminds us that courage knows no color, that determination recognizes no racial boundaries, and that the qualities of excellent soldiership, discipline, skill, and selfless service are universal human attributes rather than the province of any particular race or ethnicity. The Germans who laughed at black troops at the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge were not laughing when those same troops played a crucial role in defeating Hitler's last desperate gamble in the West. Instead, they were forced to confront the bankruptcy of their racial theories when faced with the reality of black excellence in battle. That transformation, from contempt to respect, from propaganda-fueled prejudice to battlefield-proven recognition, remains one of the most powerful aspects of the 761st Tank Battalion's extraordinary story. It stands as a testament to how performance can overcome prejudice, how courage can confront contempt, and how excellence can emerge triumphant despite the burdens of discrimination. The men of the 761st, the original Black Panthers, exemplified the best of America even when America did not always offer its best to them. Their legacy reminds us that patriotism is measured not just by willingness to serve, but by dedication to the highest ideals of the nation, even when the nation itself falls short of those ideals. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.